Hi, this is Preston Lee with Logica Health and an overview of Logica Managed Services. Logica's managed services are a direct response to our most well-known product in the HIT space, which is our FHIR Sandbox. For developers that are wanting to develop web-based front ends, most notably using the Smart on FHIR specification or other types of clients that use FHIR backends, the FHIR Sandbox environment is a fantastic resource, and in many communities has turned into the de facto development tool for very quickly getting a managed Happy FHIR instance online with a slick web interface that you can use to manage data and be able to quickly launch your smart applications without a whole lot of developer environment set up or needing to pay for your own cloud hosting environment. Where that stops is what happens when you need to do really one of two primary cases. The first being where you actually host your app for some sort of production purposes. Our FHIR Sandbox is a development suite. It doesn't actually provide hosting. So you can launch your applications from there, but if you actually need to run them 24/7, if you have an SLA that you have to meet, or really if you need to deal with any sort of patient data, PHI, PII, it is categorically not appropriate for those purposes. And I believe it should say that in our licensing agreement for people that are using that publicly. The second case is what happens when you actually have a backend app, such as a CDX hook service or a terminology server implementation, really anything other than a web-based smart front end. If you need to run that, or there's a similar case where if you have a web-based front end that needs to use a custom backend that falls outside of what we provide for free, then that falls under more of a managed services space because, again, our FHIR Sandbox does not provide hosting for you. So if you are watching this video, you probably have a project which you need or are interested in Logica running and are curious how to go about doing that. So I want to dive into some of the things you can do and how it differs from just kind of building it yourself. So the first question that seems to be common for developers that are interested in deploying an application within Logica itself is what's the difference between using Logica and just going and getting an AWS or Azure or Google or some other cloud environment and just building it yourself? And the short answer is that you can absolutely do that. Logica at present does not run its own data centers, and so under the covers we also use cloud infrastructure. However, what makes Logica distinct is in a couple of different ways. The first is that we are as a US-based not-for-profit consortium, we have the benefit of having our own community and bringing in all those best practices and expertise from a lot of different member organizations and constituent parties that you don't have. And that experience is often or usually much more valuable than any amount of money that you're going to invest in just kind of building your own cloud infrastructure. I mean, the people in these sorts of projects are much more valuable than a couple $1,000s per month in infrastructure hosting or whatever it is that you're looking to spend. And the other major difference is that our Logica is built on a number of foundational principles in interoperability and has some much larger overarching architectural concepts that over the long term we're building towards. So if you've ever heard the terms reference architecture or platform architecture come up within Logica, what we do is always going to be very much in line with a long-term vision of providing a consortium-based approach to interoperability where people are able to bring in their own componentry and have that operate and interoperate with other parties under kind of a vendor neutral environment. So I mean, it's not just us reselling cloud hosting. It's actually significantly different from that. The second question that we get usually from developers is, okay, so how do I actually get started? Once we have a very brief agreement signed with Logica, to cover costs and all that, how do I actually get my project online? And the short answer is that there's a small number of technical requirements that hopefully don't require any significant changes to your actual software. Really, if you are familiar with containerization, it should be a very, very straightforward and fast process for you to do. If you're not, typically, we'll have a conference call, maybe half hour, an hour to kind of get you off the ground. All major application development languages and frameworks are supported, but we do require that you containerize those into images that we can very easily roll out. If you are familiar with containerization, we do require and enforce 12-factor principles. I believe the website's 12factor.net. Which are also a requirement of the Logica/HL7 marketplace specification for health IT service interoperability. And what that means is when, in addition to containerizing your package into an image that we can just deploy as is, any configuration must not be baked into that. You have to read any configuration parameters from environment variables. So if you need things like usernames and passwords or database connection URLs, you can't have a static, a configuration file that you bake into that. You have to actually allow us to help you by injecting those configuration variables into your project. And we have dozens of example projects that have been used and that are actually running as managed services within Logica that we can point you towards. If we don't have one for your particular language or framework, all the major languages and frameworks have mechanisms from reading environment variables. So, it really shouldn't be too difficult to get you off the ground. And we can give you pointers of that. As part of those requirements, the ephemerality, if that's a word, isn't just for configuration, but also logs and persistence. So if you need to log data or you want to log things, that's fantastic, but really you need to print it to standard out or to standard error. Any logs that you get written to disk will disappear when we automatically provision things across different physical instances. And we have no control over that. That's just a part of our architecture. And so as long as you're printing to standard out, standard error, you should be well covered. In addition, anything that you need to write to disk may or may not go away. In fact, it will go away when that instance gets updated, which is also an automated process. If you have a database, usually some sort of SQL database, we have instances for you to connect to, though we will need to manually create a schema and kind of get an idea for what you're looking to do with that. So in other words, all your instances need to assume they're ephemeral. Sticky sessions are always problematic, so you need to make sure that your instance is horizontally scalable without knowing a priori how many instances we're actually going to run for you. So if you need help with that or thinking through some of the details, again, that's part of what we can do from managed services point of view is architecting for horizontal scalability over the web. The third major question is how to actually get access to runtime things. And so once we actually have your applications kind of bootstrapped and up and running with SSL, certificates, which we take care of for you, you don't need to worry about that. And you have hostname is how you actually go about updating and figuring out routine troubleshooting type issues when your application crashes or there's some sort of runtime exception that you need access to the logs for. So all applications are deployed in a 100% automated fashion. We don't even have the concept of a manual deployment. Everything has to be automated to make things scale for us. The way that happens is we use automated builds. So our images are, while you can create your container images manually, and we highly recommend you test those, especially for big code changes, the builds that we push out are done automatically. And as long as something builds and it comes from a branch in Git that you provide to us, we roll it out. We don't do any form of manually checking manual image checking whatsoever. So that means if it fails to start, we're going to roll it out anyway. Or if it starts, but it has some sort of runtime error or runtime exception that causes the entire thing to blow up, we will restart it for you, but we have no control or really visibility into what's going on internally other than what you put into the logs. So, again, the key takeaways here are you need to provide a GitHub, which we don't have to use GitHub, but that's our de facto system that we support. A GitHub branch that you provide to us that we'll use for automated continuous delivery. And the second is we will grant you access logs to running instances so that at any time you as a developer or your authorized people at your organization can log in, get access to the logs and troubleshoot issues such as getting stack dumps that your application may throw so that you can fix the issue, check that code in and get to that same branch when it's ready to go out, have us rebuild and redeploy very quickly. And in kind of the happy path cases, depending on what language and framework your application is developed in, that can take on the order of minutes, ideally sub-minute, but that's typically for like JavaScript applications that have dynamic languages that don't have a compilation process. If you have a Java app, those tend to be the slowest, both in terms of building and runtime. Provisioning new instances when we spin them up because of the RAM requirements into the JVM can be horrendously slow to start. But if you're using our continuous delivery process to push out new builds every 5 minutes, that's perfectly fine. That's not going to take any of our time. We're just going to keep building and re-rolling out what you actually deploy. And then when you do have issues, you can log in again at any time to do that. We provide a unified continuous delivery mechanism regardless of the type of application that you are actually deploying. So for example, if you have a smart app that's written in TypeScript or just plain JavaScript, or a backend application written in a dynamic language such as a Rails app or a Flask app, or something that's compiled into some sort of static binary and then or run directly or via a separate runtime such as a Java app or a .NET app. It's all the same delivery process to us. And so where we really take over is where your code and testing processes stop. And as soon as you check that code into what we presume to be a GitHub repository, we take over from there and have a completely automated build and deployment system that allows us to streamline deployments regardless of the specific application technology. So we are very heavily optimized intentionally for automation. You can certainly manually deploy builds, still subject to technical requirements, but if you have a need to manually pull in a specific build of an image, for example, we can do that, or you can do that directly as well, but we highly recommend that you stick with our de facto approach, which is using a branch in GitHub for your automated, for your code to be picked up automatically, built, and deployed. That works in almost all cases, and we can help go through any software configuration management practices to help get you to be successful with that approach. So assuming that any agreements are already in place and you are ready to actually get access to your project, the first thing you'll need to do is create a Logica ID. If you go to portainer.logicahealth.org and click this OAuth button, if you don't have a Logica account already, you can just create one here. You'll need to verify your email address, go through that. Please use your real name and a username that, first name dot last name or initial first name, last name, something that we can actually find you. If you use, FUBAR42 as your username, we're not gonna have any idea who that is for access control purposes. So please pick something good, supportable rather. And once you verify your account, you can log back into Portainer. The first time you get redirected back to Portainer, which is the environment that you'll use to get access to your logs, you won't actually have access to any server instances. On the screen here, I have access to our DaVinci environment. If you're part of that project, and you'll have access to that cluster. If you're part of another environment or a general membership account, you'll have access to a completely different set of services. But regardless of what you are accessing, after you log in for the first time and your account is present in our Portainer management interface, we'll need to add you manually to the appropriate access groups. So make sure that we have your username, and the appropriate way to do that is via help.logicahealth.org. For all managed service work tickets and questions, the most appropriate way to get a response is to put that into a help desk ticket. which will get automatically directed to the appropriate person, whoever that may be, and also allows us to have some traceability, not just for hour tracking, but for referencing, repeat issues and getting you what you need at the right time and in the right order. If you're just kind of getting set up, or you're at the phase where you just have code in a repository and you need the entire continuous delivery pipeline to be set up, you can also just put in a help ticket. Go to help.logicahealth.org, click Manage Services, and you can select the most appropriate option. We are always going to ask you for assuming that your project is on GitHub, your GitHub repository. Probably your GitHub username as well, just so that we know who we're talking to, a Docker Hub ID, which is not another third-party system that does the automated builds for us, and your Logica ID, which is how you'll actually log into Portainer for runtime support. And so 3 IDs, your GitHub ID and repository, assuming your code's already there, 2, your Docker Hub ID, and 3, your Logica ID, which again is for Portainer. So put those into a help ticket. We will run some manual magic to make sure that's set up. We'll probably ask you for some admin privileges in your GitHub repo, at least so that we can set up our webhooks appropriately. And there will be a little bit of back and forth. We're exchanging URLs and working through any issues there. If you have an image already built, then that's the fastest path, and we can just work with that to deploy it. We'll issue you SSL certificates, and again, that's something we manage. You don't have to worry about that. And hopefully get you up and running quickly. Once we have you in the appropriate access group into Portainer, you can log in there at any time, see where physically your instance is running, the number of instances, get access to those logs, and you should be off to the races. Once we're actually setting up your project internally, there are 2 big URLs that you want to make sure to note. The first is your Docker Hub repository URL, which you'll use to troubleshoot build-related issues, and there is a Portainer service definition that you'll use to troubleshoot runtime issues with your app. So let's go ahead and walk through one case in each category, just in one of our existing applications that we're running for DaVinci here, and show you what you're looking for in the event something goes wrong. All right, so what I have open now is a Docker Hub repository for an existing application. And from our standpoint, it doesn't really matter the internals too much of what this does, but if you go over to this build tab, you'll notice that there's a number of builds that have automatically kicked off in the past, and these have been successful, but we want to look at the logs for this most recent one to see if there are anything, let's say, if there are any errors in it or things that we need to be aware of. So we're going to click here, and the logs may take a second or two to come up, but once they're there, you'll notice that you have everything that was printed out to the console during the build process. So if you suspect your project is not building as it's supposed to, or rather you've tested it locally to see if it's building, but it doesn't seem to actually be getting deployed anywhere, it's probably because there was a build error. And in that case, you can just check these build logs, and your error should be just plain as day right here for you to look at and resolve. All right, so now let's take a look at a runtime issue. So if your service is getting out, but maybe it's down, you are going to your live URL and it says like service unavailable or like a proxy error or something like that, where you're getting an HTTP error code back. What's probably happened is that we've deployed an image that is somehow broken. Either it's not starting up at all, or it's starting up, but then there's some sort of runtime issue which is causing it to crash. And you're most likely in kind of an infinite bounce loop where we're continuously reprovisioning your image every couple seconds to every couple of minutes. And it's just going up and down, but it's never actually becoming stable. So the service declaration is something that we set up for you. And there's certain parameters here. For example, the min and max RAM that's made available are pretty important to set correctly. These should always be set. These particular values, and especially for things like Java apps, which tend to eat a lot of RAM, We may have a couple questions for you on what we can realistically expect that to be. For front-end applications that are really just static web servers, that can be very, very low in most cases without any actual issues, especially if you're using base images that are kind of pre-optimized, such as the Nginx images on Docker Hub. Anyway, if you have a runtime issue, the service declaration page will show you everything that we've done to configure your service. It'll show you the number of instances of that service that are running. If you are belonging to a group that has multiple physical servers, one of the first things you'll need to do in troubleshooting an issue is click on the service definition and go to the tasks. And the task table will show you everything that has been done with automated provisioning, and it's basically your running log. So if your app is crashed, you'll see a failed task that you can click on. You'll notice the name of it will indicate what physical or what machine it's actually running on. If it is on a different server, you can actually navigate to that different server in the cluster and get more details there. And things like that do come up from time to time, but usually it's sufficient to just click one of the log icons that you can get to in one of several ways and take a look at the task log. If there is a runtime exception, that it is almost always going to be logged, in almost all application frameworks, it'll go to standard error or standard out. If it's something that has been printed to a file in the file system, but never actually printed to standard out or standard error, it will not show up here. And so that's one of many reasons that you want to actually just print your error instead of logging it to a file, which may be difficult to get to. We do automatically purge old container instances, and so if you're stuck in a loop where your application is continually failing, you don't have days to go in and reclaim your logs. We don't have a long-term retention policy for logs. If you do require long-term retention, we can help you set that up, but by default, there isn't one. We purge pretty aggressively. Same for old container images as well, and old images of your service. So for example, if you are intending to literally release your product every hour, and maybe you're at a connect-a-thon or some other sort of real-time event where you're literally pushing out code changes over and over and over again every day, we are not going to keep old versions of your build around. They will still exist if you've tagged them appropriately and pushed them to either Docker Hub or Amazon Container Registry or Google or wherever it is that you want to keep those things long term. But we only care about the things that we're running, and we will aggressively prune the old images that we get to save on disk space because these tasks are operating in kind of a shared environment, and we don't want to overflow our disks. So the old images you really shouldn't have to worry about, though if you do have a case where you want to rescue yourself out of a situation and just quickly put up an old version of an image, you can do that within the service declaration by just changing the tag and possibly the hash that's associated with the tag to pull that specific tag off of Docker Hub or separate registry and to temporarily pause the automated deployment process. And these are more complicated tasks. Sometimes they're difficult to kind of get into, and we can help that with a help desk ticket or by some planning in advance to make sure that we're available during that particular time. All right, thank you very much for watching this. Hopefully it was informative. If you have any other questions, please go ahead and file a help desk ticket. Other than that, that should get you going. Thank you.